Hello, welcome to this podcast kindly organized by iVascular on CTO recanalization. I'm Carlo Di Mario, interventional cardiologist in the University Hospital Careggi in Florence. I happen to be also the president of the Euro CTO Club, and I'm very pleased to be joined for this podcast by a real expert in the field of CTO recanalization, who is Pier Francesco Agostoni, working in the Antwerpen University Hospital, Belgium. So please, Pier Francesco, thank you to be with us. And can you share some introduction to the topic of the use of guidewires for CTO recanalization?
Thank you very much, Carlo. Big pleasure to be here with you today and to speak about coronary guidewires. Let me start indeed with some introduction about the concept of a coronary guidewire. Here we see in this slide how the coronary guidewire is made. So we have substantially a core, that is the black part in the middle of the wire. The core can be done of several materials. It has its own diameter and it has a specific tapering direction to the tip of the wire itself. Then you have indeed the tip. The tip can be tapered or not, and it has several different kind of loads depending on the wire itself. And we'll speak about that later on. Usually the tip has also a coils around that makes it more flexible, and that determines the flexibility of the tip itself. Furthermore, we have a cover, sometimes can be polymer jacketed, and we will see later on what's the meaning of that, or you can have exposed coils. And finally, we have the coating that is a specific, indeed, coating that makes the wire more or less hydrophilic or even hydrophobic. In this slide, we have an overview of a lot of wires that are currently available on the market. This is just not to scare you, but just to have an idea of the amount of wires that are indeed present. And the idea is not to have them all on the plank, but just to make a choice of having one or two of each kind in order to get used to the wires and get accustomed with them so that you learn to use them. A very good introductory book about all the CTO tools that we have nowadays, even more about the wires, is this book that is called CTO Toolbox, that is currently available for free in the EuroCTO website. It has been written by a good friend of mine, Mihailo Kovacic, and I would suggest everybody to get it from the website for free in order to get used to the wires and to the properties of the wires. Just to give an example about how the structure of the guidewire is done, when we speak about cover, I mentioned before, we can have polymer jacketed wires and exposed coils. And here you see nicely in this chart the difference between a polymer jacketed or a just exposed coil. When we put the polymer on top of the coils, what happens is that the polymer fills in the gaps between the coils so that the wire gets more slippery. Meanwhile, with exposed coils, we have more rugged surface of the wire that makes it indeed a bit less slippery and more controllable. And the second important issue about wires is the well-known tip load. That is usually the number on the box. We all know about, for example, Confianza Pro 12. 12 is the tip load of the Confianza. Miracle, we have like 3, 6, 9, 12. And this tip load is the number that is measured in a laboratory. And basically, we let the wire pass through a pipe. We put the tip of the wire at a distance of 10 millimeters, so 1 centimeter from the end of the pipe, and we just let the wire go down. We push the wire down on a scale, and we see how many grams are needed to deviate the tip of the wire for 1 millimeter. So the more weight, the stiffer the wire. So 12 grams means that you need 12 grams to let the wire, let's say, bulge on one side for 1 millimeter over a length of 10 millimeter on the tip. Of course, again, the more the tip load, the stronger the wire. Here is an overview of the most commonly used wires nowadays in the CTO setting. And you see that we have a huge range of wires, starting from soft, non-tapered wires like Sion Black or Pilot 50, passing through soft tapered tip wires like filter, XTR, XTA, or bandit wire. Moving further to the harder non-tapered tip wires like Pilot 200, Gladius, or Raider. And then we move to the non-jacketed exposed coil wires like soft hydrophilic high torque wires like Suo 03 or Scion wire. Medium hydrophilic high torque tapered tip wires like the Gaia family. And finally, the hard hydrophilic tapered wires like Confianza Pro 12, Astato 20, Hornet 14, or Warrior. And then we have the hydrophobic wires that are a bit more, let's say, outdated, but still sometimes useful. And this is mainly the Miracle family of wires. And finally, one last comment about how to shape a coronary wire, because that's also very important. Not only the properties of the wire, but the way we handle the wire is also crucial to achieve success in CTO. And in this slide, you see how not to shape a coronary guide wire on the left side. And you don't have to shape it the way you shape it in normal PCI. In CTO, most of the time you have to go straight, so you have to give a very gentle, very minimal bend in order to have control on the direction, but the idea is to go straight. So what we do, we just bend the very distal tip, the last 1-2 millimeters of the wire, the very distal tip of the wire, and with a bend of about 30-45 degrees. We can add a second bend more proximally if there is some angulation just before the CTO to give some more direction. And this second bend will be just 10-15 degrees bend done between 3 and 6 millimeters proximal to the tip.
Thank you, Pier Francesco. I think it was very informative, but you have shown many different types of wire, and the variations are huge. So how do you select the right guide wire for a specific CTO?
Yes, indeed. Nowadays, as I mentioned, there are a lot of CTOs, a lot of wires on the market, and I think that the first step is to, when choosing a CTO wire, you have to consider the technique you are thinking to use to cross the CTO itself. And nowadays we have 4 major ways to use the CTO wires to cross the CTO, and these are mentioned here in this slide. We have the sliding technique, we have the drilling technique, we have the penetrating technique, and we have the push and torque technique. Sliding technique is a technique in which we try to track the microchannels that are present inside the CTO body. And to do that, we tend to use very soft tip polymer jacket taper tip guide wires. Of course, we always need to have our microcatheter before the CTO in order to increase our control of the wire itself. And then we take these wires that have a taper tip, and you can see in the chart here that a taper tip makes the chance to cross this microchannel higher than a normal tip guide wire, because the microchannels are usually very small. They are substantially invisible, but we know that in a lot of times they are present. Typical guide wires for this technique are the Fielder XTR, Fielder XTA, or the Bandit guide wires. Here is an example of a situation in which I used a sliding technique. You see here a CTO of the mid coronary artery, right coronary artery, with beautiful collaterals coming from the left system. And in this case, you see the real life movement advancement of the guide wire. We see that the guide wire will arrive in a while. You have a microcatheter parked inside our guiding catheter. It's an Amplas guiding catheter. At a certain point, the guide wire arrives, gets firstly the wrong way, and then all of a sudden it slides really through the CTO very easily. And this is just a real time passage of the wire through this CTO. And this is the final result after passage of the wire, after proper pre-dilatation, proper stenting, and proper post-dilatation. A second technique that we can consider is the drilling technique. Again, always have a microcatheter to support the wire, and in the drilling technique we just spin the wire pretty fast in order to track the tissue inside the CTO. And usually for the drilling technique, we use wires that have a bit harder tip, non-polymer jacketed, potentially with an hydrophobic tip so that you have more control, tactile control on the wire, and not tapered tip. Typical example of the drilling technique are the Miracle family wires and the Ultimate Bros wire. Third technique that we can consider is the penetrating technique or the puncture technique. Again, always have the microcatheter. I will never stop to stress this. In order to puncture, we need, of course, very hard tip guide wires. Usually they are not polymer jacketed and they have a tapered tip to increase the penetration power. And these wires are meant just to puncture the proximal cap of the CTO or the distal cap in case we are coming retrograde. And usually you just want to introduce your wire for a few millimeters inside the cap and then bring your microcatheter just beyond the cap, and then you would de-escalate. Example of these wires are the Confianza Pro 12, the Warrior wire, the Hornet, and the Astato. What is very important, I just mentioned before, is once you puncture the cap, you advance your microcatheter inside the initial part of the CTO body, and then you tend to de-escalate, so to go to a softer wire, softer tip wire, in order to progress further inside the CTO body. So in terms of puncturing the cap, when we use stiff wires to puncture the cap, the goal is to just puncture and not to track the CTO body further. The last technique is the push and torque technique. This is a specific technique dedicated for the Gaia family wires. And what is peculiar of these wires is that they have a specific tip, a microcone tip, that makes them more trackable inside the CTO body, and they are pre-shaped with a 1 millimeter deflection at the very distal tip. So what we do, we can really gently torque this wire and try to direct in the way we want, and then we can just push them further. And if they follow the way we want, we can continue. If they don't follow, we can just torque again in a bit in a different direction and then push again. So it's a lot of pushing, pulling, very, very gentle moving, and torquing a little bit. And this is a special technique dedicated for the Gaia family wires. One last concept I want to share with you, it's about the combination between the microcatheter and the wire, because as I mentioned before, wires have a specific tip load, but we can modify the tip load of the wires by playing between the distance of the tip of the microcatheter and the wire itself. And you have here a chart explaining this concept. So one wire has a specific tip load, that is the one written on the box. But if we increase the support by bringing the microcatheter closer to the tip, we would increase the tip load of the same wire. So in the end, we will have a tip load range to play with to increase or decrease the tip load of the wire actively by pushing and pulling the microcatheter back and forth on the wire itself. And it will increase the range of possibilities by using the combination of the microcatheter and the wire.
Pier Francesco, are there any special situations in CTO intervention that require dedicated wires?
Definitely yes. We just had a general speech about how to cross CTOs, but we know that in CTO you have a lot of handling in other parts of the CTO procedures where you can use different guide wires for specific situation. For example, one specific activity we do during CTO intervention where we are dealing with retrograde intervention is, for example, septal surfing. We know that there are connections between the LAD and the right, or the other way around, from the right to the LAD, and we can use these connections that are septal channels in order to reach the retrograde cap through a retrograde way. And to do so, we use the septal surfing technique that is usually done with a low tip load, hydrophilic, polymer jacketed guide wires, typically the Sion Black. And what we do is we do a trial and error by advancing back and forth, very gentle, the wire with a very fast spinning movement in the hope that the wire will find the right septal and will slide through the septal to reach the CTO vessel from the retrograde approach. A second example of specific use of wires in CTO setting is a well-known knuckle. Knuckle means that we generate a kind of umbrella shape of the tip, and you see here in the chart the way the knuckle can be done. Once we make this knuckle, this is meant once we are in the subintimal space to advance pretty fast the wire through the CTO body in the subintimal space. And nowadays we have a new wire that came recently on the market that is dedicated to knuckling, is the Gladius MG, or micro gap. That is, in my opinion, a fantastic wire for knuckling because it makes a very small knuckle, and this knuckle is very strong and it advances very fast through the subintimal space, moving quickly from the proximal to the distal cap. Of course, knuckle is just one step, then you need other handling, but knuckle is a very, very important concept nowadays in CTO. And I have just an example here. We see here a CTO of the middle lady with good ipsilateral visualization, somewhat blunt stump cap. After puncturing the cap with the stiff wire, we were able to introduce our microcatheter inside the proximal cap, and then we start knuckling the Gladius MG wire. So it takes a while to knuckle the wire, firstly because of course the wire comes out straight. We need to give it a bit of time by spinning and pushing. At a certain point you will see that this wire, here it goes, will knuckle spontaneously, and once we have this knuckle will proceed further, and you see here that it reaches nicely the subintimal space downstream the CTO, and this was just a question of seconds to do quickly this passage, and then we have our knuckle parked in the subintimal space next to the true lumen in the distal LED. Of course, the next step will be to do re-enter, and that's the next step specifically dedicated for CTO. But this is again just an idea to give you an example of a knuckle. One further concept in CTO intervention is when we deal with epicardial collaterals. So we spoke before about the septal collaterals. Sometimes we have to cross epicardial collaterals. And we all know that epicardial collaterals are extremely tortuous and fragile. So we need to be very gentle to cross them. Here we have an example of a very tortuous epicardial collateral shown in the picture down on the left. And the wire to cross these collaterals is the SUO 03 wire. It's a very, very, very gentle wire. 03 is the tip load, so it's 0.2 grams, so it's the lowest tip load wire available on the market nowadays. And this wire will just progress very, very gently, very, very slowly by pushing it very, very gently through these collaterals, allowing to cross even these very, very challenging epicardial collaterals. And one last concept that is also important in CTO intervention, again for retrograde procedure, is the concept of externalization. So once we cross a CTO with our microcatheter from the retrograde approach all the way up to the anterograde guiding, we generate a loop. So we have a connection that goes from our retrograde guiding catheter through the microcatheter up to the anterograde guiding catheter. So we have our two axes, and these axes are kind of connected through this system. What we can do, we can let a dedicated wire, that is a wire for externalization, pass from the retrograde to the anterograde guiding catheter, so that we generate one single loop through the heart of the patient. And there are two wires nowadays that are dedicated for this externalization, that are the RG3 guide wire or the R350 guide wires. What is specific about these guide wires is that they have a caliber that is smaller than the conventional guide wires of coronary arteries. Usually it's 0.010 for the RG3 or 0.013 for the R350. And they are not tapered, they are just meant for externalization. And once you get this system going, so when this loop going, most of the time you are done with the CTO, because this system is so strong that allows you to really tackle the CTO anterogradely in a very, very easy way.
Thank you very much, Pier Francesco. I think we learned a lot about the different characteristics of wires used for CTO recanalization, how to select them, how to use them in different situations. And of course, to learn more, you need to see cases, That's maybe a possibility you have going to our website or the EuroCTO Club. But this podcast was certainly helpful to give you an idea of how wire selection and usage works in CTO recanalization. Let me thank iVascular for having organizing and you, Pier Francesco, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you very much.